Mayor Walsh is inviting people in Boston to help shape its first citywide planning effort in 50 years. The next phase of Imagine Boston 2030 is a series of events where you can discuss the city's future and even piece together your own visions with some Legos. And to spark the conversation around city building is also a reading list. To bring us up to date is the Director of Engagement for Imagine Boston 2030, Natalia Urtubey. Thank you very much for being with us, Natalia.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
First, I'll talk about what's happening right now. We're in the midst of what could be this really almost an unusual trend for my lifetime. This is a city that has more people and maybe more economic growth down the road. So I guess you got to get ready for that.
Absolutely. Imagine Boston 2030 has been doing just that, trying to figure out what ways we could get ready for that growth and the growth that we're seeing today and how we can, move forward for 2030.
Now, one of the things I've also grown up with is that barring areas where houses were abandoned and destroyed, this is not a very sparsely settled city. So, I mean, it's almost like there's not much room, but I guess you're going to be asking people to look for something.
Absolutely. So that is exactly right. One of the things that we've realized is Boston doesn't have a ton of room to grow, right? So we are thinking about growth in lots of different ways and thinking about how people want to prioritize that growth. We've been growing at twice the national average for the last 2 years. And with that comes more people. And with more people, well, we have to house them. And so we've been talking about that a ton. And that is the number one thing on Bostonians' minds right now is how do we get more affordable housing and how do we make sure that people can stay in their homes?
Well, speaking of the Legos, you've got some in front of you. And already this reminds me of some things I see, especially in the areas closer to downtown, where the cranes have been lately. You've got these high buildings going up. Sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't. So how's this supposed to work, especially for talking about outlying neighborhoods too?
So when you look at this board, we're looking at 3 general areas in Boston. So this first area over here is our typical neighborhood. It can represent any of our neighborhoods in Boston. This is your high-rise area. And this over here is your neighborhood edges. So those parking lots you've talked about, industrial areas that haven't really been developed, low-lying areas. In Boston, obviously, we're on the waterfront. So we have depicted waterfront here and then some green spaces. And so what we're asking folks to do is, the mayor has come out with this number, 53,000 units by 2030. Where would folks want to see that growth? We know it's happening. We're here to kind of just learn from folks about where they want to see that growth and how we can help support that.
Well, part of it also, I guess, depends on the ability to get around, because there are places with some land. I can say there's some places with the land in Reedville. You can put a lot of housing there, but if the roads can't handle much traffic, then you get a problem.
Oh, absolutely. We've been working with the other planning process, Go Boston 2030, which I know you spoke with Alice a few weeks or months ago, I can't remember, but that process has been really helpful for us to inform how Imagine Boston is also looking at transportation. You mentioned Reedville. Obviously, right there, we have the Fairmont line. That needs to be a more accessible method for transportation for Bostonians, and so that is also discussed in the next plan.
We're talking with Natalia Urtubey from Imagine Boston 2030. Part of the other process here is this is not just about a conversation among people here and now in Boston. You've got a whole reading list. Some of the authors, they're still around, but on the other hand, there are some people, Robert Caro writing about Robert Moses in New York City, even Italo Calvino. I mean, this is quite a mishmash here. Yeah,
so we developed this list kind of because we realize that, in order to think about the city in the future, we have to kind of have different conversations and different processes. And what better way of doing that is with, great books to guide that conversation. And so we've been the reading list has been a fantastic opportunity for us to get people who maybe haven't been involved in some of these conversations to think about how they have those conversations with their own groups and their own friends and their own networks. And the more we talk about some of these really tough decisions and tough things that we're facing as a city, the better I think we can be, in the future. And so as we
Well, you've got one book on this reading list. It's not specifically about Boston, but it does hit very close to home. It's called Evicted. Tell me about why that's on the list.
So Evicted came on the list specifically because it talks about some of these issues that we are seeing every day, that we've seen around the country. We, can't live in our own Boston bubble. We have to learn from other experiences, and we've been looking at what other cities have done in the past and are currently doing in order to guide our process. And we thought Evicted was a really, really powerful story that could help us talk about gentrification, displacement, obviously people being removed from their homes. And that is something that we are desperately thinking about and trying to come up with creative and positive solutions to make sure that that doesn't happen in Boston.
This series is underway. Anything interesting you've heard so far?
People have really loved it. I think everything from, the kids getting really involved in the books and the youth reading list to adults who had never, thought to read some of these books. I've also had a couple of friends who aren't from Boston who said, oh my gosh, this is such a great opportunity for me to read some books that will give me context around the history of Boston, Common Ground being one of them. Common
Ground being one. And there are books about how people who are maybe up against it can change the course of events, like with Via Victoria in the South End.
Exactly. And Vanessa Calderon has been, tremendous with us. And we're going to be featuring a few community leaders to write some blogs around those books, and Vanessa is one of them. She's agreed to write a guest blog on our behalf for this book.
Well, talk about how this is going to work, because these are events where you're asking people to show up, and I guess maybe one thing I guess you might want to spell out here, this is not just for the habitual meeting goers.
And you're talking about this activity, or are you talking about the reading list? Sorry.
No, I mean the series of events with the Legos, and maybe talking about the books as well.
Yeah. So we have actually invited community-based organizations, nonprofits, civic organizations to invite us to come to their event. Our whole focus is not about creating another space for people to have to come to us, but rather how can we go to communities, how can we impact people in their everyday lives. And so we have asked people to come directly to us and say, hey, we're having this event, we'd love to have you there. And with that, we've been able to target all of these incredible events in October. And so that's going to look a little bit like a tent setup with a bunch of stations to do this activity. We're also doing it with small, community groups where we do a presentation style, where we'll do it in smaller groups as a whole. So we've kind of tailored this to for the audience and really. At any ages, we've had some 7 and 8 year olds working on some Legos in parks so far, and we hope to get as many perspectives as possible about what this might look like. The reading list in particular has been really great because the Boston Public Library has been a tremendous partner helping us launch this. At any single one of the branches, you can go in there and see the Imagine Boston list and check out one of the books, and that we hope will help drive some of the conversations. I know that the different branches have their own programming, and so we're hoping that one of these books will make it on one of their reading book club lists. But either way, it is helping to drive the conversation.
I see to your left some very big, colorful pieces. What are those for?
So as we do this activity with folks, we are asking folks to think about different types of growth, right? So these yellow ones would represent the 53,000 units. And so anybody who's participating in this activity can take apart these Legos and put housing wherever they would like. So in our, low-lying neighborhood edges, potentially in our, existing neighborhoods, and maybe they want another tall rise building in downtown Boston or high-rise areas. And then these red ones represent jobs. So any type of retail, job growth areas, development, whatever it might be. Maybe we want a restaurant or, I don't know, another BNN studio. And we can put these wherever we'd like. And these, like I said, retail, any type of growth we'd like to think about.
Well, thank you very much. We should mention if people want to get more details on events that are coming up and where to get their hands on the Legos, what's the best way to do that?
So our calendar is up to date, and it's on our website, imagine.boston.gov, and you can find all of the different events we'll be at in October, as well as the reading list, as well as our regular blog posts that allow us to tell folks what we've been up to.
Great, thank you very much. Natalia Urtubey from Imagine Boston 2030. In a moment, outreach to the Asian community by the Greater Boston Legal Services.